The world was warmer then, but not gently so. Heat lay across the land like a held breath, pressing into soil and water alike. Forests did not end cleanly at their edges. They bled into swamps, into slow rivers that twisted without urgency, into lowlands where the ground never fully dried. The air carried weight, thick with moisture and decay, rich with the quiet labor of life breaking down and beginning again. This was a time when survival did not belong to the swift alone, nor to the strong in simple terms. It belonged to those whose bodies had learned patience. Long before the land would harden into familiar continents, before cold would sharpen seasons into predictable cycles, enormous creatures shaped their days around restraint. Movement was costly. Sound carried danger. Stillness could mean safety or death. Nothing here rushed without reason. Even violence unfolded slowly, governed by temperature, hunger, and the subtle mathematics of energy. Among the heavy undergrowth, close to the earth itself, Edmontonia moved with deliberate certainty. It was not large in the way towering predators were large. It did not dominate the skyline or announce itself through motion. Its power lay elsewhere, compressed into mass, armored into permanence. Plates of bone rose from its back like worn stone, layered and irregular, shaped by generations of pressure and response. Along its sides, spikes angled outward, not elegant, not symmetrical, but effective. Each was a memory etched into bone, the residue of ancestors that survived because those spikes had once been enough. Edmontonia lived close to the ground, where the world was quieter. Ferns brushed its flanks, low branches bent under its passing. Its head remained low, angled toward food that did not flee, food that asked only patience and time. Leaves, stems, cycads worn down by teeth built not for tearing, but for grinding. Eating was not an act of urgency. It was a rhythm, steady and repetitive, an agreement with the land that energy would be taken slowly, returned slowly, and never wasted. Its eyes faced outward, wide and alert, though not sharp in the way hunters required. Edmontonia did not need precision, it needed awareness. The approach of danger was not sudden here. The forest warned those who listened. A disturbance in water, a change in the behavior of insects, a stillness where sound should have been. These were signals carried through generations, absorbed into instinct until they no longer require thought. Far from these low forests, yet bound to them by water and climate, another form of patience ruled. Titanoboa did not move across land with the same certainty. It belonged to warmth and water, to riverbanks and flooded plains where the boundary between solid ground and liquid water was never secure. Its body was length without interruption, muscle layered upon muscle, each contraction part of a system perfected over millions of years. Titanoboa did not see the world in detail, it sensed it. Heat registered where shape did not. Pressure in water spoke more clearly than light ever could. Its tongue tasted the air, collecting fragments of information invisible to others. It did not think in terms of territory or dominance. It responded to opportunity, to the faint promise of energy drifting through currents and soil. Hunger for Titanoboa was not constant. It came in long waves, separated by periods of stillness so complete they resembled absence. When fed, the great snake became part of the landscape itself, a shadow beneath water, a fallen tree along a bank, a presence so motionless it ceased to register as threat. Life moved around it unknowing until movement resumed. The land allowed both of these creatures to exist because it was generous in ways that would later become impossible. Growth was continuous, death was frequent but never final. Warmth ensured that decay fed new life almost immediately. Rivers shifted slowly, carrying nutrients rather than erasing them. The system did not favor speed, it favored endurance. Edmontonia's days unfolded within this balance. It followed paths pressed into the ground by repeated use, routes chosen not for efficiency, but for safety. Steep slopes were avoided, dense thickets were navigated with care. Turning required space and time. The armor that protected it also constrained it, fixing its shape into something difficult to alter quickly. But evolution had accounted for this. Edmontonia did not need to flee, it needed only to hold. When danger came, it rarely announced itself through sound. Predators here learned quickly that noise carried consequences. Instead, threat arrived through pressure, through the faint vibration of something large displacing water or soil. Edmontonia would pause, body tensing beneath its armor, muscles preparing not to run, but to anchor. The spikes along its sides angled subtly, shifting from passive feature to active deterrent. Most encounters ended without contact. Predators tested, evaluated, withdrew. Even the largest hunters understood cost. Injury was not a setback, it was often a sentence. A broken tooth, a damaged limb, an infected wound could unravel years of survival. The armored herbivore was not worth the risk unless desperation tipped the balance. Titanoboa understood cost differently. Its body was resilient but not invulnerable. A wound to its length could fester. Damage to muscle could compromise movement. Its strategy was not confrontation, but certainty. It did not attack unless success was nearly assured. It waited until probability leaned heavily in its favor. The paths of these two giants overlapped rarely, but inevitability does not require frequency, it requires time. Climate blurred boundaries. Rising waters expanded Titanoboa's reach. Flooded plains brought aquatic predators closer to terrestrial ones. Forests thinned in places, opening corridors between worlds that had previously remained separate. The land did not plan these shifts, it simply responded to forces larger than any individual life. Edmontonia sensed change through the behavior of plants, through the softness of ground beneath its weight, through the increased presence of water where dry paths once lay. Its movements adjusted subtly, routes altered by instinct rather than conscious choice. Yet adaptation has limits. Bodies shaped for one balance struggle when that balance tilts too far. Titanoboa followed the water. Where rivers widened, it thrived. Where floodplains lingered longer each season, it grew larger, its metabolism supported by consistent warmth and abundant prey. Size here was not excess, it was advantage. A longer body meant greater strength, greater reach, greater capacity to subdue prey without prolonged struggle. When the two finally occupied the same space, it was not the result of pursuit, it was convergence. The ground near the river had softened, vegetation grew thick but low, nourished by periodic flooding. Edmontonia moved cautiously, drawn by abundant plant life, but wary of unstable footing. Each step pressed deep impressions into the mud, evidence of mass that could not be concealed. Still, concealment was not its strategy. It relied on visibility, on the unmistakable message its form conveyed. Beneath the surface of dark water, Titanoboa lay still. The river carried sediment, reducing clarity, masking the outline of its immense body. Only faint ripples betrayed its presence, easily mistaken for drifting debris. Its awareness extended beyond sight. Vibrations traveled through water into muscle, translating mass and movement into meaning. The herbivore's approach registered as pressure, slow and heavy, not the sharp, erratic signals of smaller prey, but something grounded, deliberate. Titanoboa did not move, it evaluated. Size alone did not dictate action. Shape mattered, texture mattered, armor registered differently than flesh. Edmontonia reached the water's edge, lowering its head to feed on lush growth nourished by the river. Its body angled slightly, presenting spikes outward, a posture refined over generations. It did not know what waited beneath the surface, but it knew enough to remain guarded. Stillness settled over the scene, broken only by the quiet sounds of feeding and flowing water. Time stretched. Titanoboa shifted imperceptibly, adjusting coils to align with potential movement. It did not strike from impulse. Its nervous system processed probability, measuring distance, resistance, escape routes. The armored hide of Edmontonia presented a problem. Teeth could not easily penetrate bone plates. Coiling around stikes risked injury, yet opportunity existed not in the armor, but in the spaces between. A single moment of imbalance could change everything. The ground beneath Edmontonia's forelimbs softened further as water seeped into soil. Its weight shifted forward, subtle but significant. A fraction of its mass transferred toward the river, changing pressure patterns in ways the snake could sense instantly. This was not vulnerability in the obvious sense, it was potential. Titanoboa moved. The water displaced outward as muscles surged forward with sudden force. The strike was not aimed at armor, but at the lower flank, where spikes thinned and bone gave way to flesh. The impact carried momentum rather than precision, an attempt to destabilize rather than wound. Edmontonia reacted not with speed, but with resistance. Its body dropped lower, limbs spreading, claws digging into mud. Armor absorbed the initial impact, spikes scraping against scales with a sound lost beneath water and earth. Pain registered, but pain did not dictate response. Stability did. The snake attempted to coil, its body looping toward the midsection, but spikes disrupted clean contact. Each point of pressure forced adjustment, slowing the wrap. This was the advantage armor provided. It did not make Edmontonia invincible, it made it difficult. Mud churned, water darkened with sediment. The riverbank transformed from defined edge into chaos. The snake's strength was immense, but strength without leverage wasted energy. Edmontonia's mass anchored it, forcing the snake to work harder with each movement. For a moment, neither gained ground. This was the decision point, not chosen consciously by either, but imposed by physics and biology. Continue and risk injury or exhaustion, withdraw and preserve life for another cycle. Titanoboa adjusted strategy. Instead of tightening, it pulled, attempting to drag the armored body toward deeper water where leverage favored length and fluidity. Edmontonia resisted, pushing backward with all available force, spikes scraping against scales, each contact a warning that this prey would not submit easily. The struggle did not escalate into frenzy, it remained measured, almost restrained, each movement calculated by systems evolved to conserve energy. Neither creature sought dominance, they sought survival. Gradually, Titanoboa released pressure. The cost outweighed the gain. It loosened coils, retreating into deeper water where resistance lessened and concealment returned. The decision was not failure, it was continuity. Edmontonia remained still long after contact ended. Its body trembled slightly, not from fear but from exertion. Eventually, it shifted away from the river, choosing firmer ground. Feeding could wait, safety could not. The land absorbed the encounter without record. Mud settled, water cleared, no mark remained to tell the story. Yet within both bodies, the experience lingered, encoded not as memory but as slight adjustments in instinct, in caution, in route choice. Time continued. Encounters like this did not shape history through spectacle, they shaped it through accumulation. Each survival reinforced a design, each retreat preserved a lineage. Over thousands of generations, these moments determined which forms endured and which faded. The climate would change again, waters would recede, forests would thin, the balance that allowed such giants to coexist would unravel, slowly and without ceremony. Titanoboa's warmth-dependent world would cool beyond tolerance. Edmontonia's armored lineage would face pressures armor alone could not solve. But in this moment, suspended between stability and change, both existed fully, expressions of a world that favored patience over speed, restraint over excess. The river flowed on, indifferent to outcome, carrying with it the quiet truth that survival was never about victory, only persistence. Time did not mark that encounter as significant. It passed without pause, indifferent to tensions spent and decisions made. Days followed nights with the same humid wait, the same slow evaporation from leaf and water. Life resumed its patterns not because danger had vanished, but because danger was constant, woven so deeply into existence that it no longer demanded acknowledgement. Edmontonia carried the encounter within its body, not as recollection, but as altered balance. Muscles adjusted subtly, favoring firmer ground. Roots near open water grew less frequent. These shifts were not deliberate choices. They emerged from an internal recalibration refined by ancestry. The body learned where survival had been tested and responded by narrowing future exposure. Its armor bore faint abrasions where scales had scraped against bone. These marks would fade, covered by dust and growth, becoming indistinguishable from the countless other scars etched into its lineage. Armor was not decoration, it was history compressed into structure. Every plate was an argument against extinction, repeated across generations. Titanoboa, too, absorbed the encounter, though differently. The resistance it met registered not as threat, but as inefficiency. Energy had been spent without return. In a world governed by conservation, that imbalance mattered. The great snake adjusted, favoring prey that yielded more readily, bodies without hard edges, without unpredictable projections that disrupted the certainty of the coil. The river continued to swell and contract with seasonal rhythm. Floodwaters spread thin sheets of life across the plains, retreating to leave behind fertile decay. Fish moved inland, insects followed, smaller reptiles ventured where water had briefly claimed dominance. Titanoboa followed these movements with quiet precision, its presence shaping absence as much as consumption did. Edmontonia grazed where vegetation remained dense, away from unstable banks. Its world was measured in reach rather than distance, in familiarity rather than exploration. It did not seek novelty. Novelty carried risk. Stability, even when scarce, offered continuity. As years passed, subtle changes accumulated. Temperatures fluctuated beyond accustomed ranges. Rainfall patterns shifted, altering the timing and duration of floods. Forest composition changed gradually, favoring species tolerant of drier conditions. The land did not transform suddenly. It leaned, increment by increment, toward a new equilibrium. These changes did not announce themselves. They revealed their presence through scarcity, through the absence of once reliable signals. Feeding grounds shrank, migration paths grew uncertain. For creatures shaped by consistency, adaptation became increasingly costly. Edmontonia's armor, once an unambiguous advantage, grew heavier in a world that demanded greater movement. As food sources dispersed, traveling farther became necessary. Each additional step taxed joints and muscle. The very weight that had ensured survival against predators now exacted its own price. Titanoboa faced a different challenge. Cooling temperatures slowed metabolism. Periods of inactivity lengthened beyond usefulness. Warmth, once abundant, became localized, restricted to certain waters and seasons. The snake's immense size, so effective in conserving heat, now made it dependent on environments that were shrinking. Encounters between such giants became rarer, not because danger diminished, but because opportunity dissolved. Overlap decreased. The world that had allowed both to exist within its generous margins tightened its constraints. Still, life persisted within those limits. Edmontonia adapted where it could. Feeding patterns shifted toward tougher plants. Time spent resting increased to conserve energy. Social proximity, once occasional, became more frequent as individuals clustered around reliable resources. These gatherings were not cooperative in intent. They were coincidental, driven by shared need rather than social bond. Titanoboa retreated into refuges where warmth lingered longest. Deep channels, thermal pockets, regions where sunlight penetrated water just enough to sustain internal function. Its movements became even more deliberate. Each strike carried higher stakes. Failure could not be absorbed easily. Predation itself grew quieter. Fewer pursuits, longer waits. A world easing toward scarcity teaches restraint not as strategy, but as necessity. Eventually, the paths of Edmontonia and Titanoboa ceased to intersect at all. Not through resolution, not through dominance, but through divergence. Their environments separated, pulled apart by shifting climate and geography. What had once been shared ground became incompatible territory. Edmontonia's lineage endured for a time longer, its armored form persisting across landscapes increasingly hostile to large, slow herbivores. Yet, even armor cannot shield against the erosion of conditions. As vegetation patterns changed and competitors emerged, its form became less suited to survival. The spikes that once deterred predators offered no answer to hunger. Titanoboa's lineage faded earlier, constrained by cooling climates that undermined the physiological foundation of its size. Warmth could no longer sustain such mass. The great coils that once dominated riverbanks became liabilities. Smaller forms replaced it, better suited to fluctuating temperatures, better able to survive on less. Extinction did not arrive as catastrophe, it arrived as absence. One season without offspring, one range no longer occupied, one silence where movement had once disturbed water. The land adjusted without pause, redistributing energy to forms better aligned with new realities. The river that had once hosted immense bodies flowed on, narrowing in places, deepening in others. Sediment buried the impressions of claws and coils alike. Bones sank into mud, minerals replacing tissue grain by grain, transforming life into stone. Memory became geology. Millions of years later, fragments would surface, plates mistaken for rock, vertebrae aligned like forgotten architecture. These remnants would not tell the story of restraint, of decisions not taken, of survival measured in withdrawal rather than conquest. They would offer only shape and scale, leaving interpretation to minds separated from that world by vastness of time. Yet the truth would remain embedded within them, that survival was never guaranteed by strength alone, that dominance was temporary, that the world did not reward ambition, only alignment. Edmontonia and Titanoboa were not rivals in a narrative of victory. They were participants in a system that tolerated them only so long as conditions allowed. Their encounter on the riverbank did not change the course of history, it reflected it. A moment where two perfected forms tested the limits of their design, then retreated, not out of fear, but out of understanding written deep within muscle and bone. The land required no spectacle, it required balance. As climates cooled and continents shifted, the age that shaped such giants slipped quietly into the past. No boundary marked its end, no signal announced transition. Life adjusted, diminished, reformed. What remained was continuity itself, unbroken, indifferent to individual forms. The same forces that allowed armor to rise from flesh and coils to stretch across rivers continued to shape whatever followed. And somewhere beneath layers of earth, the silent record endured, waiting without intention, holding within it the trace of a world where patience ruled, and survival belonged not to those who conquered, but to those who endured long enough to withdraw.